Welcome to the Landscape Photography Vlogcast, hosted by myself, Tom Peters, aka the Photo Ninja, all the way up north, Paul Thompson Photography, and truth mate, it's Matt Bishop. We cover all things photography and chat to some of the best photography minds in the business. Put your feet up, the kettle on, and let's jump straight into this week's Vlogcast. Proudly sponsored by F-Stop Camera Bags, making lives of the visual storyteller easier. Welcome back, everyone. What's been going on? Has it been a while? It seems like it's been a while.
It's been 4 weeks. I think 4 weeks since the last one.
Has it been 4 weeks? I think it's been a while, hasn't it? It's been more. Sorry, everybody. We've been why haven't we done one lately? What the hell happened?
I don't know. I think we missed one somewhere along the line. I'm not sure why it happened, but we seem to miss one somewhere.
I think it was because we're trying to chase up that bloke. What was his name? Bill Ward,
was it?
he kept stuffing us around all the time. We couldn't get him on, and we finally sucked him in to come on tonight. It took us 6 months, but we got there. And, Bill, how are you, mate?
I'm very good. I've been busy. I've been very, very busy. But I'm here now. Delighted to be here now. Lovely to meet you all, gents. Great to be here.
Thank you very much. Absolutely lovely to have you on. It's been we've had actually that many people, especially from the Pentax community. So many people who have wanted to hear your story and hear you talk about photography. And we've had that many requests come in and said you gotta get Bill Ward in. And we finally got you on. So it's great to have you here, mate.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you so much. Delighted to be here. Far away.
So for people who don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself, mate. Start off with how you got into photography, basically. That's what people want to hear, don't they? How it all started.
Gosh, wow, that's a big old question, isn't it? Well, I really started taking pictures when I was about 7. I had a Kodak Instamatic. And it was one of those ones where, do you remember those? Did you ever have one of those? You're probably a bit too young for one of those. But
yeah, I remember them.
Yeah, I remember them.
Yeah. It's kind of one of those things where you the bit that you look through was completely different to the bit that the camera lens saw. So you had a separate eyepiece so it was none of this single lens reflex stuff. The eyepiece was completely different to the bit through the camera lens, essentially. So you would often end up, what you saw and what you got were two completely different things. But I took a lot of pictures when I was a youngster. So sort of when I was 7 or 8, I took a lot of dogs, cats, cars in particular. I used to ride around with my brother around our kind of neck of the woods, and there was a place where there were a lot of really nice cars. So we used to ride around there and take pictures of all whatever they were, Lotuses and all of that kind of stuff. But really, I also took a lot of pictures of, apart from family too, of water and also landscapes. And we used to, I'm from Newcastle upon Tyne, Paul. We were talking about this earlier, and I know you're from just outside of Bamburgh, and we used to go up there pretty much all the time. And we used to go to the northeast coast sort of pretty much every weekend. We'd go to Tynemouth and Whitley Bay. If you're from that kind of neck of the woods, you'll know where I'm talking about. And my sister still lives there, actually. And we used to sort of make weekly visits to that kind of neck of the woods. So water has always played a pretty huge part in my growing up. And also the Northumbrian coastline. We used to visit sort of every square inch of it, really, up from Tynemouth going all the way up to Holy Island and around that neck of the woods, and used to go to different bits of it on different occasions, to go on holiday up there and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, we also went on holiday down to Cornwall and that kind of a thing, but often up to Bamburgh and Beadnall Sea Houses, that kind of stretch, Craster, Embleton. And I always took a camera. And we used to go to the Lake District as well, and I used to just stare at water, just stare at it. When we used to go down to Cornwall, there was there's a place called Pol Doom. It's a beach on the Lizard, and it's just south or just north of Mullion. And we stayed there one summer, and I remember sort of sitting on a rock there for like 2 or 3 hours at a time, just staring, just sitting, just staring. So I've always had a big thing about water. I'm a bit of a lapsed surfer, longboarder really, and I've done a lot of canoeing in my time, and I'll just kind of seek out water wherever I happen to be, and if I have a camera with me, then all well and good. And if I don't have a camera with me, then I'll still do it. I'll still go to the coast. I'll still go to waterfalls. I'll still go to rivers, etc. I just like being near it and being near water. And sort of for the last sort of 20 years, particularly the last 10 or 15, I've been taking a lot of pictures of it. So that's the sort of, I don't know if that's a kind of a long or a short version, but that's pretty much it.
And I think it's a pretty good description of someone who, like myself, grew up, and I think everyone can relate to this, because when we're kids, we're all extremely creative, aren't we? I think as we get older, we get distracted, and then we're told that we've got to be adults. We're told we've got to grow up, aren't we? And
get proper jobs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we've sort of put into, It's funny you said that, because I mean, I look at you, and we'll talk about this further on, Bill, about you as a photographer, about creativity and how I see you as a photographer. But, going back to being a child, and you say you're sitting there and you're staring at water, and you keep staring at water for hours. That's what we did when we were kids. We sit there and we would stare. Can you remember when you were a kid and you would stare at like a brick on a wall? and with these patterns, there's patterns in a brick, and you could see like a dragon, and then you could see like this tree fighting up against an axe, and you would try and make all these patterns about everything, and you sit there and just stare at it for hours. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it's like.
Or was it just me? Was that just me?
It might have been just you. The brick thing.
The brick was an example.
You've got to be shooting out already, look.
I do know exactly what you mean. There is a thing with fire, isn't it? And as it's a similar kind of a thing. You just look at it.
Yeah.
I do wonder sometimes with a lot of this stuff, if it's sort of to do with DNA and going back to, lots of scientists talk about it, and anthropologists, don't they, in terms of it's in the DNA, sort of going back to that time when we all lived in caves and did the fire, and also kind of, coming out, if you believe in evolution and all of those kind of things, coming out the primordial ooze and landing, on dry land with gills and all of that kind of stuff. We are water in lots of ways. As humans, we're 70-80% water. And we need it to survive. And most humans live within 60 miles of it. So water, it is one of those things where it's sort of extremely important for us at a logical level, at a rational level. We need it to survive. We're made from it. But also, I think at an emotional level, all of us connect with it in some kind of way, shape, or form. It's no secret that houses near water cost more than houses further away. Do you know what I mean? So it's a thing, isn't it? So and that's to do with the emotional connection that we all have with it. So I think sort of it looms pretty large in all of our lives in some kind of way, shape, or form, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's definitely it's fascinating, isn't it, as a subject? I find it the same. I do a lot of my photography includes water. It's one of those things that I'm always drawn to because I like the movement of it. I like the way that it changes constantly. It's never the same twice. It's always got that sort of intrigue with it, and I gravitate towards any shot that has water in it. In fact, I'll purposely try and put water in it if I can, because I just like that. I like the texture and detail it gives it.
Yeah, and it's like you say, it's constantly moving. It's kind of theming variations. It's constantly surprising, and often you don't know what you're going to get until you trip the shutter. You have some idea of what you might get, but that's very different often to what you do get, and sometimes it completely surprises you. And those kind of moments are worth their weight in gold, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm guessing with you saying that as well, is that's where the fascination with ICM comes, because it's got this similar sort of appeal almost, because you're never quite sure how it's going to turn out. You've got an idea, but you haven't got the end result until you actually see what you've produced, really. So I'm guessing.
I couldn't agree more. It's all about potential, isn't it? And it's about hypothesis testing. And you start with something, but where you start and where you finish are often two utterly different places. And it's that journey that from the start point to the end point, and digital cameras have accelerated the sort of the learning on ICM so fast, because you can get instant feedback on what you're doing directly on the back of the camera. When Freeman Patterson was doing this in the 1980s in Canada, he was using a film camera, and he was having to wait between 1 and 2 weeks to see back what he'd done, the ICM that he'd run on his camera. And I mean, he's still going. I mean, it's still a brilliant, wonderful, creative photographer. But in those kind of terms, digital cameras have really sort of accelerated the learning on ICM sort of exponentially, I would say, particularly over the last sort of 10 or 15 years. And it's people like Doug Chinnery, Valder Bailey, Chris Friel, who've really been sort of at the vanguard of this movement since, the late 2009s, 10s, 11s, those kinds of times, and sort of really propelled it to the forefront. It's not quite in the mainstream yet of photography, but it is heading
No, it's not.
in that direction.
It is.
You can kind of feel it kind of heading in that direction, just because of its potential, I think, and its ability to surprise and show the world in a way you possibly have never seen it before.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
How do you see yourself? Well, Bill, with
as little as possible.
It's funny you say that, Bill, because I see your intentional. For people who don't know what ICM is, because we do have listeners out there who are beginner photographers.
It's falling down a hill with the camera in your hand.
It's Paul with a dodgy tripod. Intentional camera movement. So, how do you see yourself? I mean, as a photographer, I look at you, and before we started the podcast, the recording tonight, I was having a quick chat with the guys, about you as a photographer, and one of the things that I brought up was the intentional camera movement. That I see you as quite well known as a photographer to use it. So how do you think those use? Well,
man.
Do you see yourself as in the experimental phase of this type of photography, or someone who's sort of,
That's such a good question, because I suspect you're always in the experimental phase of intentional camera movement. I kind of think that's probably how it is, because I've been sort of, I first came across it in an interview in the online landscape photography magazine On Landscape, and it was an interview with Doug Chinnery, and it was back in 2011, and I loved the pictures that he showed, but B, I just loved how he spoke about it, and I'm still a massive fan of Doug's work, and I did a workshop with him and Valder Bailey very early on, sort of 2013 time, back when they were still working for Light and Land, I think, and I just love how I just love how he thinks about photography. I love his creative restlessness, actually, and how he keeps pushing boundaries. I mean, certainly a lot of the work that I've seen him doing recently is painting related, and Valder Bailey, of course, has come, and Chris Friel too, both, but come from a painting background to photography, and Doug's almost going the other way, from the photography background to painting, but also still taking a lot of pictures. And I just love the creative restlessness, but I particularly liked what you'll find, I think, with a lot of ICM photographers, a lot of us have come from a long exposure background. It's a similar kind of thing. With a long exposure thing, the camera can see something that the human eye can't, and you're sort of aggregating time. You're kind of squashing it together and taking moments and sometimes squishing them together or sometimes extrapolating them. And the camera sees that kind of thing over sort of 2 and 3 minutes, that the human eye, the sorts of things that the human eye can't see. And there's a similar thing, I think, going on with intentional camera movement. You're just doing it probably for shorter periods of time. I mean, I'll do, for those of you who've never tried this before, I mean, a good shutter speed to start at is something where you'll get guaranteed blur. So something around half a second is a good place to start, somewhere between half a second and a second. And then after that, and I would always start with something to which you are naturally drawn, because you will have an affinity with that thing, which will make you curious about it. And then after that, it's just a question of trying various things, experimenting. I tend to think of it as kind of hypothesis testing, having ideas, trying them, trying different movements, up and down, left to right, forward and back, twisting motions, zoom bursts, moving the camera whilst your zoom burst, twisting, opening the shutter for slightly longer, taking some of the, using your camera as a paintbrush sometimes, taking some of the sky, some of the ground, some of what's in front of you, mixing it all together. And one of the things I love about this is sometimes quite sharp movement, sometimes quite jerky, is the variables in this are literally infinite. You, as a photographer, have an infinite choice of subject matter, and then how you choose to interact with it with a moving camera is also infinite, because the shutter speed variations are infinite, the focus variations are infinite, and also your movements are infinite. And so in that kind of a way, a lot of the time, you're never quite sure what you're going to get until you start. I mean, if you're interested in starting out with this stuff, then lateral and vertical movements, those kind of two planes are often interesting places to start. So vertical movements, say with trees, you can get some very nice results quite quickly with just going up the trunks of trees with half a second to 1 second. If you find yourself at the coast, going across the horizon with a camera, some people like to start off with tripods with this. I did years ago, starting off with tripods, and some people kind of still quite like the precision of that. But I personally prefer it sort of much more freeform, much just and handheld. And there's all sorts of funny little moves you can do with little judders and little shakes, and starting on something and then just flicking the camera off, and you'll find you get some nice little detail, but also some movement too. And so in that kind of sense, all of the variations are infinite, and you'll probably have a starting point or an idea in mind when you start, and then it's just a question of what shows up when you do that on the back of the camera. And for me, often, if it reminds you of something else, often some of my favourite photographs are things where I've started off with one idea and ended up literally with something utterly completely different, because what shows up on the back of a camera reminds you of something completely different. So you start off with some mountains or some hills, and you end up with a dunescape or something, or something that looks like sort of something in the desert, just because the sunset colours, say, have kind of taken you in that direction. So for me, where you are and wherever you happen to be, and your choice of subject doesn't have to be your finish point. It's your starting point, and then after that, it's simply about your imagination and what shows up on the back of the camera at the time.
I always thought that intentional camera movement was I could just imagine someone just sitting here with their camera on a tripod and with a hammer and just going bang right over the long shutter speed. Oh no, it was your intentional camera movement. I had no idea it was so, I always thought you might have had this special hammer, didn't leave chips in the side of your lens or something. Yeah. Like a plastic mullet or something. Yeah.
Yeah. You can get some quite interesting effects. I've done some stuff in cities where you do set up a camera on a tripod for long exposures. Yeah. And then if you've got quite a long lens, you don't actually have to move the camera very much. So if you just flick the side of the lens with your finger, you just get it to oscillate, just wobble a little bit, and that is often enough over, say, a 2, 3, 4 second exposure, just to blur the edges of things enough to give it to lose some of the definition and generate some mystery in the image, and just give it as kind of an abstract quality. And then after that, it's just a question of what else you choose to do, which direction you choose to flick it, or if you then take it off and just start properly wobbling it around. But I do think with this kind of, I think a good healthy mindset for this, for me, from my kind of point of view, is not to worry too much about failure. I've just written. I wrote for the ICM photography magazine, as you probably know, and I've just written an article for them, which is specifically about not fearing failure. And you know, I'm an actor for my other day job, and acting is full of failure. You have to go through that. Rehearsal is full of failure. During any kind of given day that you rehearse, you're probably going to bin sort of 50 or 60% of it. A director will say, that's interesting, but make another choice. And I do think photography and intentional camera movement is very much like that. But the only difference is you're your own writer, you're your own director. And as you're seeing stuff appear on the back of the camera, you're saying to yourself, make another choice, make another choice. I talk a lot about, what if? Just think about the variables that you can change. And also, if the subject matter, maybe after you've sort of tried various different variables, isn't working for you, just thinking about what else is there here? What else haven't I seen? What else is hiding in plain sight? What else could I make something of? And then sort of just seeing what you make of it. And I do love it. It just for Stephanie Johnson, who's the founder of ICM Photography Magazine, it said something very, I thought, apposite in an article that she wrote today, which is it's as much about the process as it is about the end result, and enjoying the journey towards as much, and not worrying too much about the frustration. Doug Chinnery very early on has always said, if you can get 5 out of 100 with this as a technique, you're doing really well. And I would really agree. My experience is absolutely of that. But out of those 500, you wouldn't have got to those 500 without the other 95. Yeah. Because it's those 95.
You need them.
You do.
Yeah.
Because it's like going down a cul-de-sac and you kind of go, well, that's not working. What else? Well, that's not working. What else? Well, that's nearly working. Something's going on in there that's quite interesting. What is it specifically in there that is of interest to me? How can I do more of it? And so in that kind of a way, a lot of it is, it's not a linear process. There's a lot of sort of bouncing around from idea to idea to idea. And that for me is one of the joys of it, is because you just end up often in a sort of in a place far removed from your starting point. But without all of those intermediary steps and all of those, in inverted commas, failures, you couldn't have got to your final destination.
Yeah.
Well,
that's photography, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
yeah.
right.
That's photography. How many times do we go out and fail? Can we go out and come home and fail and be bitterly disappointed? We did probably. I speak for myself at least. The amount of times I went out in the first couple of years, and I'm talking film days, which was a big failure because you'd be so excited to get your results, like a month later, and that was horrible anyway. But how many times do you go out and it was a complete failure, and then you come home? I'll use for example. I went out a fortnight ago. I was in the Dolomites for a week. And I decided to go to this massive, beautiful, huge lake with this turquoise water, with these pine trees in the background, this massive mountain behind me. And I've been wanting to go to this place for years. And it's snowing up there in the Dolomites. It's winter. So I hike for about 13 or 14 Ks through the snow. So it took me hours to get there. Hours. No food, just some water. I was expecting to find a restaurant when I got there. I didn't. And I got there, and the lake, it wasn't frozen over. Like sometimes lakes can be frozen over and they're beautiful and you can see those cracks in them. No, it was just like a big dump of snow over the top of the lake. and there was nothing. There's nothing to photograph. So I just put my backpack on, put my snowshoes on, and I hiked back again. I was gone the whole entire day. I didn't get one good photograph, but I didn't get disappointed because that's photography. But years ago, I would have been like, oh, you suck at this. You're a horrible photographer. Give it up now. That's the end of it, you know?
And still a beautiful day in its own right. That's isn't it? And for me, I've done a project on starlings, intentional camera movement on starlings and in camera.
Oh, I love that stuff, by the way, mate. Yeah. That was awesome. Yeah. That work, it was beautiful. I really, really love those images you did there. They were gorgeous.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very kind. Yeah, a bit. But one of the really interesting things about that is some days the starlings don't turn up. They go somewhere else. And so and it kind of means that the days when they do turn up, you're delighted because you know that this is a special night or a special evening. And I kind of think photography is similar. It is. We go out so often looking at it. It's a bit like, surfers have the search, and it's the search for, whether it's the perfect wave or a wave. And I think photography is very similar like that. We go out on the search, and sometimes we don't come back with very much, or what we had in our mind's eye, but we still had a good time going out and investigating and enjoying, sort of spending time with Mother Nature, and that is worth something. But it also means, that the next time you do get something, or the next time you do find something, or imagine something, or see something, or make something that pleases you, you're delighted because this doesn't happen every time. What was that thing Ansel Adams? He always said, if he gets 10 or 12 photographs in a year that he likes, he's delighted. And I think sometimes we beat ourselves up quite a bit in the modern world about this. It's tricky making sort of photographs that please you, but boy, is it worth it.
Yeah, definitely is. Yeah, and I think is, as long as you don't, especially with landscape photography, I've come to the realization lately that if you go out expecting a sunrise and a sunset, because we're all told that sunrise and sunset are the most beneficial times to go out as photographers. If you go out with that mindset, you're going to fail an awful lot. And I think if you I've started more and more and more to kind of lean away from that, and I don't go out on those times quite so often, and it forces me into looking for a different type of image, I think. Because I think as landscape photographers, you can get locked into this sort of thing where it's got to be one of those conditions. It's got to be either sunrise, it's got to be either sunset, and it's got to be that kind of light. Whereas I think if you open yourself up to the fact that there's a whole day's worth of light, and light changes all the time. I think it frees you up. It frees you to make better decisions and come up with work that's probably more your own, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, it's more original, isn't it?
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. You know what I do for a living when I'm not a photographer, and I spend a lot of time in the theatre, and so at night during sort of sunsets and golden hours, I'm on stage often, and so we're not with a camera in my hand, and for sunrises we're asleep. If you do theatre and the show comes down at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, you're not getting to bed till 2 o'clock, so you can't get up at 5 a.m. And you've got to have the energy to do a show again the next night. So I will go out often, like you said, Paul, between sort of 11, 12 o'clock, midday, and 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've learned over the last sort of few years is precisely what you've just said, actually, is that there's all sorts of joy to be had at that time of day. And flat light for me is some of the most beautiful light. And you can, it's almost like a kind of a dimmer switch is turned up at the beginning of the day and then turned down at the end of the day. But you kind of flat light in particular, if you've got very low cloud and you're near a beach, it acts like a softbox, and it brings out all sorts of lovely kind of subtle nuanced shadows in the sand patterns and everything around it. And you can end up with something terribly beautiful that would be completely destroyed by very harsh, contrasty light. So it's just a different set of lighting conditions, but it's all beautiful. It's just up to us, I think. I couldn't agree more. It's just up to us, isn't it, as photographers, as to what we choose to do with it.
I think it was that came down to, we've been very highly influenced from the film photography days, because I mean, I remember when I started taking photography, I would go down to the beach close to my house, and like you, Bill, I was fascinated with not just water but actual piers themselves, jetties. So I was fascinated by the composition of this, beautiful leading line. And
Today's episode of the Landscape Photography Vlogcast is proudly brought to you by f-stop camera bags, backpacks and accessories. Paul, Tom and Matt are all members of the f-stop Pathfinder program, active users of their gear, and highly endorse the product for its reliability, functionality and ruggedness. If you're looking for the best camera bag and accessories for your photography gear, then look no further than f-stop, making the lives of the visual storyteller easier.
And all my photography was done at sunrise, but that was due to the fact that I was limited by the light, and I had my, Fuji Velvia ISO 50 film, and I wanted to achieve long exposure, because back in the film days, that was as creative as you could get, was using long exposures, and to have a 10-stop ND filter 22 years ago, that didn't exist, You get, if you're lucky, if you get your hands on a 3-stop, couldn't you? And so, I think that we've been influenced by that. Now into the digital era, it's not necessary that we have to shoot at sunrise and sunset. It's not. Who said the light is bad at midday? Really.
And I think
it's so changeable, isn't it? Sorry, mate.
Yeah, well, this is it. And I think I've realised it more since I've gone full time, and I've got all day to kind of go out and create. And if I limited myself to those times of day, I don't think I'd get anything else done. because obviously those ends of the day, somewhere along the line, you have to have time to do normal things. And if all I would do is going out at sunrise and sunset every day, I'd never be here. I'd never be at home. So I think because I'm at full time and I'm having to create all the time, it's forced my hand a little bit to actually go out and be more creative with the light that I'm shooting, really.
For me, I totally agree, because I predominantly shoot woodlands now these days, and that soft sort of dappled light is what I want. And to be fair, even when it is harsh and bright, there's still opportunities in the woods as well, or in the big cities. If you've got harsh light, you're casting shadows. It creates a whole new world in terms of that as well, doesn't it? So there's always something to shoot, isn't there? You're probably looking at the wrong subject if there isn't. Creativity, it always stems back to creativity, doesn't it? There's always something to shoot if you're in that creative, if you're in that zone, if you feel like it at the time, which for me dictates generally where I go. I don't know about you, Bill, but how do you choose? Because looking at your photography, and and you turn your hand to so many different types of. Well, it's just, again, it's creativity. You can see that your sort of intimate shots, the detailed shots of the rocks, and then you've got your ICM of the beach and the sea, and then you can see you've even got some stuff of the buildings. You can see that they're your images. I feel like there is.
Nice.
Yeah, I feel like there is similarity in style across them, even though they're completely different. You know what I mean? So I think like your creativity, your thought process that you tackle each time you decide what to shoot, or location or subject, it's obviously very clear in your head. You obviously you are a creative person anyway, as we know, but you can really see that. I think
the time.
Yeah, some of the time. Yeah, everyone has their off days, but yeah, it's that doesn't come natural to some people, does it? The creativity side.
Yeah, for me, it tends to be about wherever I happen to be, and one of the interesting things about the day job that I've done for the last sort of 20 years is you end up in very different places often.
Yeah.
And you often end up in places you've never been before. And there's a lot of travelling involved, and particularly if you're doing theatre, you'll be sort of travelling to a different city every week usually, or certainly every 2 weeks. And so, and most theatres are in cities. Some aren't. Some are by the coast, and but most theatres are in cities. And then it's a question of, and I'll always try and get digs, sort of somewhere to stay in the city within walking distance if I possibly can, and then I'll carry a camera. And then it's a question of what you bump into on the way, and I love that part of it because you're never quite sure what it's going to be when you turn up. And also, sometimes I remember I took a picture. There's a really great subject. There's a really great sculpture at it's called the Blade, and it's at Sheffield train station. And I was doing a gig at the Lyceum in Sheffield, which is one of the big theatres in the city centre. And I had some digs, which were about half an hour's walk away, but I had to walk through the station from the digs to get to the theatre that I was working in. And I remember on the very, very first day, our opening, we were touring, and it was our very first day in Sheffield. I walked for the first time through the station, and I came out the other side, and you bump into the Blade, which is this sculpture. It's a water sculpture, really. It's a kind of S-shaped water sculpture. Very beautiful it is too. And the light was just bouncing off it in a really, and some of the people who were walking past it were silhouetted. And it's one of those things that, you know that whole thing about photography being noticing, and we all tend to notice different things. That's what I happened to notice that day. And at that moment, and it was one of those things where I had about sort of 10 or 15 minutes, and I kind of thought, well, should I carry on to the theatre or should I stay? And I kind of thought, well, why don't I stay? I'm still going to be in good time. I'm not going to be late. There was a thing, incidentally, in the theatre about being late. You must not, you cannot, you must never, ever, ever, ever be late. It's a thing. So I just kind of thought, well, I've got 10 minutes. Why don't I use this 10 minutes? And it was, I had just the most brilliant time just experimenting and mucking about. And I've got some pictures that I really liked from that day. And the interesting thing for me was that every day afterwards, I did the same walk, and I never saw it look like that again. And it is that kind of a thing where you kind of go, it may look like that again, but you might not be there. And so it's sort of taking advantage of those kind of moments. And increasingly, the more I think about this and the more I do this, the more I think that literally the most important ingredient in photography is time. It's not really place, it's time. And it's having the time to take the pressure off yourself almost and give yourself a break and just to spend time somewhere and see what you notice. Yeah. And the more of that you have, the more you'll tend to enjoy yourself, it seems to me. And also the more that you see. And so in that kind of way, it matters less for me increasingly where you are. And it matters more for me the quality of the time that you have wherever it is that you happen to be.
Yeah, that's a cool way of looking at it, actually.
I look at you. Well, I've looked at your work for years now, Bill, and I look at a lot of photographers at the moment, especially probably in the last 2 or 3 years. A lot of photographers, let's say, that are very, very popular with regard to social media. Okay, so they might not be, concrete photographers that are, do workshops or have. They're just very, very popular on social media, let's say. And they tend to, have this style, sort of, it's the movement at that moment. And I've definitely seen probably the last 2 years, maybe even a bit less, Paul, this sort of the more intimate photography, the more, honing in on details photography, and a lot of people are sort of moving towards this type of photography now. Bill's been doing this.
Considered photography.
Let's call sort of abstract landscaped. Bill's been doing this work for years.
Yeah.
I mean, he just isn't as active on social media, and it's interesting to speak to Bill, and I've seen his work for years on it, and I've believe it or not, Bill, I've learned a lot from you with my photography. I mean, I first started out for many, many years with a grand landscape, and then there's guys like you who have taught me to sort of say, hey, it's not always about the grand landscape and getting that big wide-angle lens out and trying to capture it all and get the perfect light and get the storm coming in and get the tree as your frame. There's so many elements that you can capture and get creative with those elements. And you've been doing it for a bloody long time, mate. And
thanks, Matt. That's really kind of you. In that kind of genre, I tell you who was really useful for me and whose work I admired for years is a photographer called David Ward, who was a contemporary of Joe Cornish's in the landscape world.
Okay.
And he's written 2 books, which are quite old now, sort of 20, 30 years old. One, I think, is The Landscape Beyond, and the other is The Landscape Within. And they're both just about what's important to him photographically. And he has a thing specifically just about giving yourself time. And I tell you who's also really interesting on this subject is Paul Sanders. Brilliant, wonderful black and white photographer. And just giving yourself time to acclimatize to wherever it is that you happen to be, sort of make a relationship with wherever it is that you happen to be. And the longer you give yourself to do that, then the more of the details that you start to notice. Because if you're just turning up somewhere and getting seeing the big picture and the big vision,
definitely.
Yeah, and often that is marvelous. Often that is. It's a brilliant thing to see.
It's a tourist photo, isn't it? You rock up, you say, I've paid my money to come to Patagonia. Now I want to take a big photo of this story,
And
I'm not going to travel the other side of the world to take a photo of a leaf, am I?
Do you know why I laugh? Because I'm thinking back to the Lake District. I was in the Lake District 2 days ago. We were up one of the fells, well-known fells, and every 2 minutes I sat there and watched. We'd set up for the day just to kind of watch the light. And it was about 150 people passed, turned up with the phone, went bang, right, off, gone.
Yeah, there you go.
And I'm sitting there with my head in my hands and thinking, oh my God, I can't take much more of this. It's just, you've come to this spectacular place and you're literally spending seconds in it.
Yeah.
It's not even it's just a bang, there it is, that'll do. And we just set up today for the whole day just to watch what the light was going to do and just photograph what was going to happen with the light.
That's what we do, though.
Just brought it to mind. Yeah, that just brought it to mind completely, and it was just, that's why, because there is a lot of that sort of culture where it's just turn up, grab a shot, gone, that's it.
Yeah.
I was in southern Iceland where at a waterfall where I saw a couple in a 4-wheel drive do literally that. Put a GoPro on the dashboard, eat a pot noodle. The GoPro was getting the picture of the waterfall. They were looking at it. They're looking at the pot noodle done. They're off, and you can go, great. The GoPro saw all of it, but you didn't.
Yeah.
It's got to do. It was a really funny thing. But I think that's right. I think that's right. It kind of, but if you do give yourself a bit of time to and do the big vista and see that and the massive, and sometimes it's a very beautiful thing, isn't it? And it punches you in the face. It's like a sort of visceral assault from Mother Nature, isn't it? And then and that in itself can be brilliant. But there is also something else lurking there often that you just maybe need to give yourself a little bit of time to see and to just have a little scoot about and look at. It's that whole thing, isn't it? Look behind you, look up, look down, look in.
Yeah.
Mother Nature works in 360 degrees, not just 180. And it is that thing, isn't it, of just giving yourself a bit of time just to see the other details of what might be, around. And a good friend of mine, he did this exercise with us once, and which was, and he's not a photographer, but I worked in advertising before I was an actor, and I know him from there, and he's a brilliant fella, really wonderful. Creative individual, and we went round to his house. He married a Spanish woman, and we went round to his house a long time ago now, 15, 20 years ago, and he did this thing about noticing. And he has a big thing about meditation and noticing, and he did a sort of an exercise on it. And we stood out, and there were about 9 of us, 10 of us there, and he said, stand there. He took us out into his garden, and he said, right, just have a look at the garden here. Just have a look at the garden and just clock what you see, clock what you notice. And he let us do it for 2 minutes. Then he said, right, imagine a sort of a square meter, a box, a square meter. That's all you're allowed to look at. Have a little look around that for a minute, see what you notice. And then after that, have a look within that square meter, have a look at a square foot within that square meter, see what you notice. And for 2 minutes, we did that. And he went, within that square foot, have a look at the square inch of that square foot. If you have to get down on your hands and knees, get down on your hands and knees. But have a look, study it. Make sure you've taken in every single detail. And it was just a brilliant, brilliant thing to do, because you kind of go, oh my God, there's all sorts of interesting stuff going on in that square inch. There's how the little, leaves of the grass kind of intersect with each other. Sometimes there's little bugs wobbling their way through. There's how the light hits it, all of that. And that is happening in every square inch of that garden. And all of a sudden you kind of go, boom, there's details everywhere if you're prepared to spend the time to look and to give yourself the license to do it. And I do that. That's really stayed with me, that little thing that he did in his garden. And it only took us about 20 minutes or half an hour, but it stayed with me forever since then.
Yeah. I must have had a really boring childhood. That's all I did when I was a kid.
That's
what that's what photography just became easy for me. Well, it didn't become that easy. Unlike Derek Mill, it was an example, you tosser. No, we don't do beast, mate.
What sort of brick was it? Because I'm a bricklayer. What sort of brick?
It wasn't a brick. We don't even have bricks in Australia. It's all weatherboard, mate.
It was a stone.
I've lost my train of thought now. Yeah, what I was going to say, that's what I did as a kid. It was stare at things and have that time to look at things and find things. And, photography came far much later on. I tried to be a musician. That went really, really bad. But
what instrument did he play? What were you playing?
I was in a band. I had my own band for a few years. No, I try and play guitar. Horrible guitarist. Really, really bad. I enjoy the acoustic. Not good at electric. And yeah, took singing lessons, and they were horrible. He should have just said to me in the beginning, "Look, mate, just save your money and don't come anymore." But he didn't. He did. He put me off. I wanted to be a rock star. Never became one, so I just became a landscape photographer instead. It's funny. There's a big correlation with musicians and landscape photographers.
There is definitely. It's a thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is a thing. But yeah, that whole thing about, as you were saying, Bill, and I'm a big believer, and I've spoken about this many times. I think that photographers, especially in your adulthood, it's about trying to be a child again, trying to enjoy details. I really, really believe that. That's why, the whole bringing it all back again now, because I really, really think it's important that we have to look at things again like we do as children. And it's not about being immature. It's about, as you said, giving ourselves time again,
Yeah. It's human nature as well.
We weren't in a hurry when we were children, were we? No. When we were ever in a hurry, we didn't have anyone telling us to, it was just time,
Theatre, you know, I work in it. Theatre is built on that principle. A play is called a play for that reason. That's what it is. It's a play. You play. And the rehearsal process is about playing. And loads of directors will say that. Don't, you know, keep that childlike quality, keep that curiosity, keep asking questions. Don't ever make assumptions about anything, you know, and be prepared. I talk a lot in photography. I don't think I've mentioned it about it, but about mucking about. Mucking about. It's so important. And you know, and just to give yourself, and it's back to what we're saying, license not to fail, but license just to muck about and see what you come up with, see what you make. And I couldn't agree more with you, Matt. I think you're absolutely right about that. It's just having, it is the childlike quality of play and exploration and just finding stuff out and enjoying something for its own sake. Not having to have an end product or something, and not having to have it, just enjoying it for its own sake. And I mean, we talk a lot about it in acting, and athletes will talk about it, and footballers will talk about it. Flow in acting, we call it being in the moment. And it is that you know that thing where, as a photographer, where you can kind of be lost somewhere for 9 hours. You just lose all track of time because you've become utterly sort of engrossed and encapsulated with you know what's around you, and it's just allowing yourself that kind of sort of those kinds of experiences, isn't it? Really, and that's why it seems to me that's one of the reasons why we love what we do, is the ability to kind of lose yourself, get lost, lose yourself wholly, completely in something like you, Matt, as a musician too, I would imagine. It's very similar territory, all of this, isn't it? It's kind of getting lost in an improvisation, or getting lost in a song, getting lost in a tune. It's all very similar territory, this, where you just forget. The brain and the body start to communicate completely in symphony as one, and you stop having to power the whole thing.
Yeah.
And a delightful feeling. It's a wonderful feeling, isn't it, when it happens? And you know, and it might not happen very often, but goodness me, it's brilliant when it does.
Oh yeah, and it is.
Yeah,
that sensation you have, Bill, when you take that photo, and you just say to yourself, "Yeah, I just did it." That's
it. Got the shot.
Yeah.
When you're in a moment and you take that photo and you got just that feeling in your body, that sensation of your whole body. I just took that. I just took
your iPhone. You mean your iPhone self?
You don't even need.
Within you and your house. Really hot. Fighting through the dynamites.
You don't even need to go home and open Photoshop, do you? Because you know it in your mind. Bang, I just got it. That's a beautiful moment, isn't it? Yeah.
I do very, very early on, when I was sort of using film cameras and I actually just converted to digital, and but I'd come from a film camera background. And I went to see, I did one of those portfolio review things, and I took my work to see. It was for Rhubarb, and Rhonda, I can't remember her name. I think it might have been Rhonda Wilson. Anyway, if it was her, she was brilliant, utterly brilliant. And she in particular said something to me that is, and she talked about it, and she talked about the latent image. And what she was meaning by that was, and she said to me, "Why don't you go back and shoot some film for a bit?" Because there is, and it's the moment between you pressing the shutter and you seeing the finished thing. And with digital cameras, and I've been actually talking about it a lot today, about instant sort of feedback in that kind of way, using it as a palette and moving it forward based on the ideas that turn up. But she was talking about it very much in terms of that time that in between you pressing the shutter and thinking, "Oh, that was good," and you actually seeing the photograph. You carry that with you in film days. You carry that feeling with you in a way that with digital cameras you don't, because you get instant gratification.
Yeah.
And she said,
So
if
true.
you just remind yourself of that feeling, that is the thing, that's photography, that's the thing to kind of carry with you. And I thought it was brilliant. And I've tried to sort of keep that that kind of sense, that kind of feeling, that kind of sense. You know, when you just have a feeling exactly what you were saying about when you trip the shutter and you kind of go, oh, that's good. And sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you get it back, but the feeling that you kind of carry with you is worth its weight in gold. It's. I mean, so much of this, isn't it, is emotional. So much of our connection with the outside world is emotional, and so much of what we're communicating and so much of what we're saying is not rational really at all. It's our own sort of specific feelings and our own specific individual connections with wherever we happen to be. And you know, the more of that we can sort of take and make in our photographs, I think the more individual they're likely to be, because we each have very different connections with very different places, just depending on, I mean, even as a human, you will have a different connection with the same place on two separate days, just because how you feel, whether you got up early, got up late, in a bad mood, in not. So what you bring into a room or into a place changes, doesn't it? And then what Mother Nature is serving up changes. And I often talk about that. It's a meeting place, isn't it? You're trying to work towards a meeting place between you and Mother Nature. You bring your energy, she brings her energy, and then somewhere in the middle between the two is a place that you're trying to meet each other and hang out and take a photograph of that. And so it's that kind of a thing, isn't it? That kind of sense of, I don't know, something or other sort of emotional thing in there. That's what you're trying to sort of squish into your camera, and that's also the kind of the thing that you kind of end up carrying around with you for some considerable time.
Yeah, and it's almost like, I don't know about you, Bill, but when I'm in the woods, or when because I lived in Cornwall for about 10 years as well, so I totally understand the surfing and the shooting the water, but like sometimes it's not always about the image, is it? Like you just said, it's about that moment. I know you took the image, but you were there, physically there, wasn't you? You know, and the image is like it's a memory, but that wasn't, sometimes when I go into the woods, I'm not necessarily going, I'm going hopefully to try and take an image, but, you know, it's all about the emotional connection at that time and the freedom and being connected to the woods. And without that, I wouldn't come out with an image that I would be happy with, even if I got amazing conditions. If I'm not in the mood, or I'm not feeling creative, I just feel like going for a walk, I might end up feeling creative, but by the time I get to the end of my walk, but I might not be at the start. So it's not always about the image, I don't find. It's about just being there in that moment.
I think it's 90% of the moment, isn't it, really? And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Definitely.
otherwise, you'd just never do it. It's like the fishing. I don't know. Did you guys ever get into fishing?
Oh
The old man did. Yeah, the old man does lots of fishing.
I did it once, but it didn't work out for me. But I know exactly what you mean. It's just about the being there as much as anything else.
Yeah.
I never caught a fish. Never caught a fish. I was when a little kid, almost every single weekend, I'd get my bike out and I'd leave Mum and Dad's house in the morning on my bike with my little fishing rod and go down to the pier and go fishing. Never caught a bloody thing.
We had a brilliant time.
Yeah.
Actually, I did once. I caught a fish, which is a whiting in Australia. It's quite an expensive fish. And my dad still says to the day I bought that fish. I was about 7. I don't know where I would get the friggin' money to buy a fish from, but anyway.
Congratulations.
Yeah. But, you know, like, how many times do you go fishing? How many times you see someone out in a pier having a fish or out at the beach, you know, casting their rod out, never catching anything?
No,
what the hell are they doing?
More about the experience of it and just taking the time to.
It is, isn't it? Otherwise, you just go to a shop and buy a fish, for God's sake. You know, probably would have been cheaper because the price of petrol these days, you may as well just walked into a shop and bought yourself a frozen fish and
Frozen Frisian.
I can always remember in the winter months when we lived in Cornwall, and I used to like going surfing all year round anyway. But in the winter, obviously, there's no holiday makers there, and it's quiet. But the surf's big, chunky, and the amount of times I come back and been gone 2 hours, and my missus would say, "Did you catch the good waves?" I said, "No, I just got absolutely pounded for an hour and a half."
Yeah.
She said, "Oh, that's a shame." I said, "No, it's great. I loved it."
Yeah.
Didn't catch one wave, just got hammered.
Got pounded, froze to death. Awesome.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah. I mean, you come back, you feel fresh. And you feel like, that was brilliant.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing with the woods, or, shooting the water shapes, or you just got to take it wherever it is. And the less you force it, the more creative it all just comes, doesn't it?
Yeah, let it come to you. It's that whole thing, isn't it? Let it come to you.
Yeah. But you are right. You've got to be there and be there and be there. And you'll get one, won't you? Well, that's the idea anyway.
Yeah.
Bill, one thing I'd like to say is that, all the people that are listening to the podcast tonight is to please take the time and go and look at your website and have a look at your work and try and understand. I'm sure you can get a very clear sense of who you are as a creative person through your photography, and I hope that after listening to you talk tonight, that people can, it gives people a bit more of an excuse with regard to, this is a landscape photography podcast, but photography in general, to become a bit more creative and, try and understand who we are as a person and slow down and look at things differently. And you're a great example of someone who does that. And I really, really, I really enjoy your photography, mate, because I think you've always not pushed creativity, but you've always tried to show that, with movements in photography, the way they go, you've always sort of stood out for who you are as a person in photography, and I really, really admire that, mate. And it was really, really great to have you on tonight, mate.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Matt. That's really kind of you. Thank you. Yeah, you just got to be yourself ultimately, don't you? And take. Yeah. I always say this: it is to just take pictures that please you. And if you do, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be doing something that's individual and specific. And that's all I've ever done really is take pictures that please me, and I just love it.
Yeah, well, it definitely shows in your work, Bill. 100%.
Yeah, she was.
It comes across very, very natural and free and easy. And the results are the results. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful work. Absolutely.
Very, very, very. I just like. So I'm just scrolling through your Instagram. There's so many shots, like simplicity. Like the picture. I can see like a picture of a double door, and it's just the way you took it. That isn't a snapshot. That you can tell there's been thought into it. You know what I mean? And it doesn't matter what you're shooting, whether it's the double doors or the Clifton suspension bridge or a small detail on a rock. You can tell that there's a continual thought process and time gone into each one. Very inspiring. I wish it went dark, because I probably would go out now, I think.
I'll tell you, after tonight's podcast, it kind of makes you want to go out and take a photo, doesn't it? Huh? That's for sure.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah.
It goes back to everything Paul's been saying a lot. I've noticed Paul's been saying this a lot in the last year or so, is when something that you see pleases the eye, take a bloody photo of it.
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of it. If you see something that interests you, and that's actually, if you've come across something that you're fascinated by, or it's taken your interest, then there's a shot there. You just have to kind of work out where it is, basically.
I totally agree with that. I think that's bang on. Yeah, that absolutely sort of good stuff. That wise words.
Well, thanks very much for coming on, Bill. It's been an absolute pleasure. We're going to put all your website details and everything in the description of this podcast, where people can find your work. Please, everybody, go and check it out. And yeah, it's been fantastic to have you on.
It has.
Thanks so much.
God bless
Yeah,
you,
thanks.
Paul. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Matt. Lovely to speak to you guys. And real pleasure. Thank you. And good luck with the podcast. Good luck, and good luck with the photography too. And see you out there. See you out there one day.
Definitely.
Thanks so much.
Definitely, mate.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thanks,
mate.
mate.
Take care, buddy.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.